What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're going to be talking about Universal's latest venture into one of the universes of one of their many classic horror monsters. This time, Dracula once again with The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Directed by André Øvredal and written by Bragi F. Schutt and Zach Olkowicz, this film stars Corey Hawkins, Ainsley's Franciosi, Liam Cunningham, David Dastmalchian, Javier Botet, and many more. So if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know I'm a huge fan of creature features. I'm a huge fan of the classic horror monsters that came from Universal Studios, and I've covered a bunch of that here on the channel with plenty more that I still want to cover. When it comes to Universal and their various monster movies over the course of decades and decades and decades, I've always been a fan. Whether they're good or bad, those sets of characters are something I just kind of hold very deep and close to my heart. I actually have Dracula here on my shirt right here, and when I heard that they were making this movie, I was absolutely ecstatic. The Last Voyage of the Demeter takes place on a ship called the Demeter, where we see a crew transporting some goods over to London, I believe, and over the course of their trip overseas, they end up learning that there is a vampire on board, of course, Dracula, Nosferatu, and now they must try to do their best over multiple nights and days as they have this vampire trying to kill them every single night. And that's the base premise here. We'll get a little bit further into it. But when I heard this movie was coming out, I was really excited because a lot of iterations outside of the original Bram Stoker book, the novel Dracula, a lot of those other iterations like Nosferatu or things like the 1931 Dracula and the various other Draculas we have gotten usually show us kind of glimpses of what happened here. They reference it, they allude to it, but we never really have had a movie that showcases the events of what happens on the Demeter. We know that Dracula takes this ship, he kind of is a stowaway on this ship to get from one place to the next, and we always know that he ended up wreaking havoc, but we had never seen it before. So it's nice today in 2023 to have a film that looks as good as this film does for the most part, that is able to tell us that story. When the movie opens, we see the Demeter pull up and they got all this cargo they need to take, and they're looking for a couple of new people to hop onto the crew to help them over their journey. And that's when we meet Corey Hawkins' character, who is a doctor who's just looking for an opportunity to kind of practice his doctor's skills. This film takes place in the late 1800s, and of course, as a black man, even though he went to Cambridge and ended up getting his education to be a doctor, it's not really something that he's able to practice really as a career because of his skin color. But this crew ends up giving him a chance, so he ends up joining the Demeter crew to take this cargo across the seas. Not too long into the movie, we end up finding out that there's a stowaway, as they believe, that ends up being discovered down in the very bottom part where the cargo is, as one of the cargo pieces has opened up, releasing a bunch of dirt, and a young woman played by Ainsley Franciosi, who is essentially somebody who grew up in the village down below under the actual castle that Dracula's from, and she kind of tells the story of how her village has feared this entity that lives up in that castle and would sometimes give sacrifices, and she unfortunately was one of those sacrifices that Dracula had also stowed away in the cargo to go across seas so he can feed on her over the course of time. And outside of Corey Hawkins and Ainsley Franciosi, you have a slew of other people here, as well as Liam Cunningham, you have David Dastmalchian in here, and a bunch of other actors who play the crew. You have a young boy in here who plays a character named Toby. And yeah, pretty much this movie, for what it is a straightforward slasher creature feature movie. It's not trying to be anything more, it's not trying to be anything less. If you were a fan of those those kinds of movies like I am, then I think there's a lot of fun to be had here. But what I will say is that outside of it just being a formulaic Dracula story, outside of it being a very familiar Dracula story, in a lot of ways, outside of the setting of it being on this boat that's having to deal with, crazy weather and lightning and all these different things like that, this is a pretty straightforward slasher film. You have a bunch of characters that are dealing with some sort of creature that they don't know exactly where it is at first. They don't really fully understand what they're dealing with, and over the course of the film, plenty of them get offed, which does lead to some really fun and interesting kills over the course of the film. I really enjoyed the guts and the gore that you get to see throughout the course of the movie, and I really enjoyed Dracula. I really got to praise the actor who played Dracula. Of course, a lot of the character is CG throughout the course of the film, but Javier Botet is the actor who played the character. There are a couple of moments where Dracula speaks in the film, but most notably, there's a couple of moments where they use some practical effects that I thought were really, really effective. Though, unfortunately, I would say my biggest gripe with the character throughout the course of the film is while he does look pretty fucking badass at times, and there's obviously moments I knew that they were going to have to use CGI, especially as you see in the trailer where he has wings and he's flying around. There were some really, really great moments visually that I thought were really cool with the character design that could have used some practicality, maybe a blend of practical effects and CG effects, but there are a lot of CG heavy moments when it comes to Dracula. But I'm happy to say I really enjoyed the character design. We've seen various iterations that have depicted him a little bit more human-like, of course, far more charming with the slicked back hair, but there's obviously been various iterations that have shown him to be a beast, be a monster, and this version is far more of that. So honestly, I don't have an abundance to say on this other than the fact that I had a good time with it. I found it to be a well-shot film that has a solid score throughout the course of the film. The performances I thought were pretty solid throughout. There's some fun action. There's some great tense moments throughout. There's some great practical effects. There's great set design and costume design as well. I think when it comes to the production value overall, outside of some very CG cartoony looking moments when it came to Dracula, I think for the most part the movie looks really, really good. It's really well staged and it was entertaining to watch. The movie is maybe a little bit too long for what it is. There's a couple of things here and there I probably would have trimmed, and I think after a couple of nights and days that we're spending on this ship, there is a sense of redundancy with what's going on with Dracula, as sometimes it feels like he'll only just take out a person a night for a little bit until things really ramp up later on. So for a little bit it just kind of feels like we're doing the same thing. The crew's wondering what's happening, somebody ends up getting killed that night, then they're like, oh man, that thing that killed the guy last night is out there, and then the daylight would come and they try to start figuring things out again, and then Dracula would come back and kill another guy, and then we get back to daylight, and there was a little bit of a redundancy feeling throughout the course of the film at times. But outside of that, I think this is a straightforward creature feature slasher film with Dracula at the center of it that tells us a story within the Dracula story that we don't really often get to see on screen. It's something that's always spoken about and alluded to in all of the various Dracula films, but it's not something we've ever been able to see to this extent. If you're familiar with the Dracula story, whether it be the novel or the various iterations of movies that have been depictions of that Bram Stoker novel, then you know what happens before and after the events of the Demeter. So there wasn't really a whole bunch of shock and awe for me when it came to the narrative here, but for the most part, I was entertained. I'd probably catch this again someday on streaming just for the visuals and the action and some of the guts and gore, and just as a fun slasher. But I say all that knowing that I am a fan of that genre. I love slashers, the cheesy ones of the 80s, 70s, and the 90s, and all the way up to the more modern day ones that are a little bit more dark and gruesome. But these are just my opinions on the film. What did you guys think of The Last Voyage of the Demeter? Did you enjoy this movie? Did you not enjoy this film? Did this kind of scratch your itch when it came to something like Dracula? How did you guys feel about the movie is all I want to know. So leave any and all comments down below. Hit that like button down below if you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch all of you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.